Hello, welcome to another Quilt Block of the Month video. Today I'm going to be showing you a block that goes by many names. This is what the block looks like. Um, if you're doing an entire quilt of this block, you would generally set it on point with sashing strips. Since we're not doing too many blocks on point in our sampler for the year, we will be putting it on horizontally. Some of the many names that this goes by is a album block, a friendship block, chimney sweep, four cross, an autograph patch or an autograph block, a basket weave, courthouse square, memory quilt, or even just a signature block. This was a frequent block used for making a quilt for pioneer women as they were leaving their homes here in the East and heading west. All of their friends and the community would each make such a block, and they would write their name in the block and then they would embroider over it so that they had a permanent memory of their friends that were left behind. And the friends could also, besides their name, put well wishes for them for the journey. Another type of use for this block that was quite common in the 1800s was as a memory quilt. When someone in the family died, they would use the clothing to make the outer blocks, and usually they would either use new fabric or like a white shirt or a pale shirt to make the memory block. They would write the name of the family member that passed away, probably the dates of birth and death, and where they lived most of their life. As you can see, I made this block with just two colors. Generally, you want the signature portion to be a very pale white, off-white, yellow. It can be a print, but it would need to be a very pale print, sometimes something like a white on white. I also made the other squares in the cross in the same fabric. You can get a different look to the quilt by using another fabric for the cross pieces. For instance, you would want to keep it in a light, but I could change the look of the quilt by switching it to this light print, or even this one, which is a print, but it is from a distance. It looks very light and pale also. For the colored squares, you would want either a medium or a dark print. You can use large print fabrics, but you might want to fussy cut them if there was something that would be particularly important to the person whose name is going to be signed. The block does go together fairly quickly. We are going to be learning a new technique, a strip piecing technique. So as you can see, this block has the center patch, a square, and this originally was also a square, but you will be cutting off the excess parts of the squares around the block. To use the strip piecing method, we're going to concentrate on just this upper portion for the moment. We will start with this block, and you would use two of your lighter pieces. In this case, I'm using a purple, a light purple, and then one colored piece. You would initially sew the colored piece face to face with the right sides of one of the white pieces. You would sew the 1/4 inch seam totally along the one strip. You would then press it open with the seam going to the darker fabric. So at that point you would have something that looks like this. Then you're going to want to sew a second piece of your light fabric to the opposite side, again pressing the seam to the dark fabric when you're finished. Once you have that 3-piece section, and each of these strips will be cut to the size width of the square it will finish to. When you've gotten the 3 pieces sewn together in your little sandwich, I'm condensing it because my hands aren't wide enough to hold it completely out. You will then trim the ends to make everything nice and even, and then you will cut the width across to the size of square you need, still including seam allowances. The next row will be just the same, except instead of just 3 blocks, you will have 5. So you will do the center and 1 dark, then you will sew an extra light, an extra dark, and an extra light. So you will have a 5-inch wide piece. Again, you will cut it, or you will press the seams to the darker fabric all the way down, and you will trim it and cut out 2 strips, one for here and one for here, that will make these blocks, the same as you did with the top. Then comes the fancy part. You want to make sure that this solid block in the middle, which is roughly the equivalent of 3 squares, is measured accurately. What you're going to do is you're going to take your 5 patch that you just made, and you are going to measure from the seam allowance on the outside of the solid to the outside square, across the center square, and to the other seam allowance. That is the exact measurement you're going to use to cut your center piece of solid pail. The reason you want to do that is you're then going to just do a 2 patch of a light and a dark and cut 2 squares out of that that will be sewn to either end. This will allow you then to start in the center, sew a 5-piece matching the corners and interlocking and sewing directly across. Then you will move up to the next one and you'll be doing the 3 patch, again matching the corners here. And finally at the top you will be sewing a single square. In my case I used pale. You can use a secondary color here if you like. A lot of it depends on how you want your finished product to look, and if you're planning to use sashing strips or you're going to be butting squares together. If you are butting them together and the other side has white, you get a kind of a secondary pattern going here that does make a nice break between this block color and the next block color. Okay, you will repeat the same process on the other side. As you're pressing the long rows when you've added them together, you're wanting to press away from the center. So as you can see here, my seams go out toward the point of the block. And then the most important part, since you do have I'm going to use this as an example. Since you do have a block sticking out here and you want a squared edge, you're going to need to trim this away. But before you do your trimming, it's very important that you leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that when you do either sew a sashing strip or the next adjacent block, you have your seam allowance. You would hate to cut off the tip of your points. So this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The best way, or the easiest way to get that, is by using an acrylic ruler that has a 1/4 inch seam line. Now we're not talking about the solid heavy line here. We're talking about this little one right along the top. This is a very old 12.5 inch square up ruler. Some of the newer ones have that 1/4 inch along all sides. This ruler is older, like I said. If you don't have a 12.5 inch square up, you can use like a 12.5 inch rectangular ruler, or even a 24 inch one if you happen to have one of those. If you don't have the acrylic ruler, I would suggest a ruler and a pencil to trim the line, measuring carefully at each point to make sure that you have a good 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. The reason I'm introducing this block now is in case you would like to make a memento of the patch quilt that you're making this year, following along monthly, by putting possibly your name, the year, where you got the block ideas. If you're making this as a gift, you might want to put the recipient's name. Besides making an entire quilt with this block, some people like to use this as a signature block on another quilt. They will put it as part of the backing fabric, and they will put if it's the front of the quilt is a different block, they will put the name of the block, perhaps the year it was made. When you do sign this, you will need to make sure you use an indelible pen that will not fade or bleed when it gets wet. So definitely test it on a sample fabric. Another thing you can do if you are handy with embroidery is pencil the name in, practice perhaps on an appropriate sized piece of paper, and make sure that you have the seam allowances marked, and then use that to put the name in and embroider over the letters. You can also machine embroider it, or have a friend do it if that's not a skill that you're good with. As I said, this was a popular quilt in the 1800s for people that were leaving home. Some of the other times that the block was used would be to celebrate a wedding. Perhaps everyone that attended the wedding or was in the wedding party would each sign a block. For a very special birthday, somebody coming of age, turning a special anniversary year like a 50th birthday, or even for a wedding anniversary. You could, besides the farewell aspect, it was also given as a welcome aspect. Frequently it was made by a young woman's friends when she found out she was going to be having a new baby. Everyone would use a fabric that they had scraps of to celebrate the new child, and they would give a welcome message in each block. Another use that I have found for it was as a travel log. And this is even partly a more modern use of it. You make a commemorative block for each state in the United States you visited, or each country you visited if you happen to be a world traveler. You could put the dates of the travel in the block, as well as possible cities you visited or why you made the trip. Just some tips with this block. Be sure that you measure accurately. The strips that you are making are not going to be the nice simple 3-inch, 3.5-inch. It's going to be a little off. It's a 2 4/5 inch strip that you will be cutting in squares. Be sure that you press well. Measure your seams to make sure you're getting an accurate 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then as you're joining the blocks, if you're having difficulty getting the points to match, feel free to use straight pins. Just remember not to sew over them when you're getting ready to go. Well, that is my video for the album friendship chimney sweep autograph block, whatever you feel like calling it. I was first introduced to this block when I was a preteen. My mother was one of 9 children. When my grandmother was turning, I believe she was turning 50 at the time, all of the girls got together and made this kind of a quilt with the name of each child. They had sent block strips off to their 3 brothers to sign, and sometimes their wives embroidered it. Sometimes one of the sisters took care of it. And then they each decided what color was a fond memory for them with their mother, and made the block. The other thing that they did in this particular case was each of the grandchildren, so my mother's name would have been here, my sister signed across the block at the top, I wrote my name in the bottom, and we embroidered it. So my grandmother had a listing of all of her children and her grandchildren on one cozy block. Well, that's all the information I have for you today. I'll see you again soon with another craft from the Clinton Library. Thank you.